Europe's top human rights court has ruled that the failure of the Swiss government to adequately tackle climate change is a violation of human rights. The case was brought by more than 2,000 women. The landmark ruling could have far-reaching implications for other European countries.
You are listening to Climate Court Voices, a podcast where we speak with the individuals leading crucial climate lawsuits and championing environmental justice efforts worldwide. In this episode, I speak with Elisabeth Stern, a board member of KlimaSeniorinnen in Switzerland, an association of elderly women founded in 2016 that took the Swiss government to court for what they alleged was an inadequate response to the climate crisis. After seeing their case dismissed by multiple Swiss courts, the women finally won their case at the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg in April 2024. Their victory was historic, the first time an international court ruled that a state's climate inaction violates human rights.
Okay. At a certain age, one is not very good in remembering all the questions. So, my name is Elisabeth Stern. I am by profession a cultural anthropologist. I am a volunteer with the KlimaSeniorinnen. When I say a volunteer, a very busy volunteer, let's put it that way. And I'm also a member of the executive committee. So that makes me especially busy. How did I meet the KlimaSeniorinnen? I was very involved in several activist groups. 40 years ago, beginning with wanting to end world hunger. I was never modest in my sort of visions. And as a cultural anthropologist, I spent 2 years in Zimbabwe. And there was this experience with this old man who took me out to his fields, and then he was sort of showing around, look how dry it is, it hasn't rained in 3 years. Usually the water dams, they fill up at least once every year, and we can water our fields, but hasn't happened the last 3 years. And then he said this one sentence, the weather is changing. He wasn't talking about climate change. That word just actually hardly anybody used, except the scientists, but not down to the people. Anyway, this just hit me. And when I returned after 2 years, it was clear to me I cannot just go back to my university job. And so I joined a small company that had just started, a real green startup trying to help other green startups. And we did that for 8 to 10 years, and that was it. Then we really went bankrupt. So I went back to my job as a cultural anthropologist, and it was very clear to me when I have retired, I want to work as a volunteer in some environmental organization, and that's what I did. First, it was another one, it was fossil-free, and then I met one of the KlimaSeniorinnen. She said to me, I think you can argue your case well, because there was this incident at the university. We were at the same talk, and then I had asked a question that sort of got a highly involved issue in that room. That's why she said this to me. I think you can argue your case. Why don't you join us? And I did. And a year later, I was then elected or voted in the executive committee. And that's where I am.
KlimaSeniorinnen was formed by around 40 Swiss elderly women in 2016. They were concerned that their government wasn't taking enough action to meet the goals laid out in its CO2 Act, which came into force in 2013. Initially, the CO2 Act set a target of a 20% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions over 1990 levels by 2020. The target was later revised, and in response to the Paris Agreement in 2015, Switzerland also set a 50% reduction target by 2030 and a net zero target by mid-century. But by 2019, Switzerland had only achieved an emission reduction of 11%, far off the 20% target. Temperatures in Switzerland are rising faster than the global average, and there are ever more frequent heat waves. They threaten everyone, but particularly the elderly, increasing the risk of heat stroke, dehydration, and cardiovascular failure. In Europe, which is warming twice as fast as any other continent, heat-related mortality has increased by around 30% in the past 2 decades, with tens of thousands of annual deaths recorded in recent years. A 2025 study found that more than 92.7% of heat-related deaths will be experienced in individuals aged 65 years or older. In late 2016, KlimaSeniorinnen joined forces with Greenpeace to take their case against the Federal Council to court. But in the 6 years that followed, several Swiss courts, including the Federal Supreme Court, dismissed their case. The Supreme Court didn't think the women's rights were being directly or sufficiently affected by climate change compared to the general population, and reasoned that the risks posed by climate change were not yet intense enough to justify legal action, stating there was still time for legislative measures.
So very, very soon then after I joined, there came the message from the main court in Switzerland dismissing our case. And then we had this whole discussion. Do we want to go on? Do we want to go to Strasbourg, to the European Court of Human Rights? And then we decided, yes, we do that. I'm a cultural anthropologist. I'm not a lawyer. I have maybe the privilege that I have a daughter who is a lawyer and very interested in human rights. And so when I couldn't understand something, I could ask her. But, you know, after so many years, I would say any of us understood the case and what it is about, but of course not at the beginning. Then it was our lead lawyer, and this is Cordelia Baer. She was she still is, from my point of view, a very young person. And she worked up the whole argument.
Under Cordelia's guidance, the Swiss women built their argument. The case initiated was a carefully planned legal effort that addresses a key challenge in climate litigation. Climate change affects everyone, and this makes it very difficult for courts to allow every individual claim against major polluters. What the women's legal team needed was a clearly defined group of people who could demonstrate not only that their right to life was endangered by rising temperatures, but also that they were uniquely vulnerable. Luckily, research has consistently shown that women are more affected by heat than men, and older individuals are more impacted than younger ones. In Switzerland, studies revealed that older women experienced the highest death rate from heat during the summer of 2022, with scientists estimating that 60% of these deaths could have been prevented if climate change had not occurred. In the end, the plaintiffs submitted that Switzerland's inadequate greenhouse gas emission reduction targets and failure to meet existing targets posed a direct threat to the women's health, well-being and quality of life. Their demand was simple. Switzerland must set tougher emission reduction targets and do everything in its power to do its fair share to keep the global temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees.
So sometimes we were asked, why didn't you complain for the babies, or in the name of the babies, or why didn't you include old men? Do you hate men? And we had to tell them, no, we don't. We actually like them. We even love our own. So this whole question of being affected, who is that older women? And then Cordelia and Greenpeace, who actually had the whole idea, they started looking for older women, and then there were a few organizations like the rebellious grandparents, and they found the people, the older women, very quickly, who were willing to start to follow the lead of Cordelia to put in this complaint.
In March 2023, a group of them traveled to Strasbourg to hear their arguments being made in front of the European Court of Human Rights Grand Chamber, which is reserved for the most serious and novel cases. Elisabeth, who was 74 at the time, said it felt like a historic moment. It was indeed the first environmental-related case heard by the court. The plaintiffs presented their medical records to the court as evidence that older adults, and particularly older women, suffer more than others during periods of extreme heat and face an increasing risk of dying from it. Their claims rested on the idea that Switzerland's climate inaction was in breach of Articles 2 and 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights, which protect the right to life and to respect for private and family life. On the 9th of April 2024, the court issued its decision.
The European Court of Human Rights has ruled in favour of Swiss pensioners that their government's failure to act on climate change violated their human rights. It's the first time the court has accepted such an argument and opens the door to more legal challenges.
In the first moment, we weren't even sure whether we won the case. I mean, we couldn't talk with each other, so each one made his or her own experience. And for me, I thought, is now the president of the court, this Irish lady, Theofra O'Leary, I don't know how to pronounce, still don't know how to pronounce her first name. And I thought that she was really still reading what we had asked for, but actually she read the judgment. And then we looked at each other and then over to one of our lawyers, because we had Cordelia in the lead and then we had 3 or 4 more. And then, you know, the first thumb went up by one of those lawyers, and then it was very clear. And when it was over and we went outside, we still were a little bit unsure, but then suddenly also a big bang happened and we were just rejoicing. And then for a while, right after the verdict, it was pretty volatile. And we had the feeling also, on one hand, we changed the narrative about old women very clearly, that old women are not only in a rocking chair knitting. I don't have anything against knitting. That they can actually, the most unlikely group perhaps of the society, can be the source of a success like we had. And the success is not in a sense, like I was successful. No, the success is, hey, we established that climate change is a human right. I mean, this is incredible. This has not been verbalized by an international court. I mean, there were some national courts, they did that, but not on this higher level.
In the landmark ruling, the European Court of Human Rights sided with the KlimaSeniorinnen, holding that Switzerland had failed to protect its citizens from the impacts of climate change in good time and in an appropriate and consistent manner. The court ruled that the Swiss Confederation had violated Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which guarantees the right to respect for private and family life. In a historic interpretation, the court found that Article 8 encompasses a specific right to effective state protection from the serious adverse effects of climate change on lives, health, well-being and quality of life. The ruling specifically noted that Swiss authorities had failed to comply with their duties under the Convention by neglecting to quantify national greenhouse gas emission limitations, essentially failing to implement a sufficient domestic regulatory framework or carbon budget. This failure to act in an appropriate and timely manner establishes a critical legal precedent for all 46 member states of the Council of Europe. The state inaction on climate change constitutes a human rights violation. The judges also unanimously found a violation of Article 6, Section 1, which protects the right to a fair trial. This followed the rejection of the KlimaSeniorinnen's case by 3 levels of judicial bodies in Switzerland. The court argued that these previous rulings were not based on a sufficient examination of the scientific evidence concerning climate change, highlighting a failure of the domestic courts to provide the applicants with access to justice on a matter of such critical importance. Reactions to the verdict were mixed. Elisabeth said she and other plaintiffs were initially overwhelmed by the amount of support and interest the ruling sparked, particularly abroad.
There were 2 sides. The parliament said no, mutiny on the bounty, I called it. And then the environmental groups who were inspired, and then the other pillar were the reactions abroad, and they were just incredible. I mean, the judgment within minutes went around the world. I don't know how we actually manage, we older people, we old women, to do all the interviews right after the judgment. I had one microphone after the next in front of my mouth. It was, and some of the others also, of course. We were absolutely overwhelmed by that, and we were overwhelmed by the home reaction. We didn't expect that. We did not expect that the parliamentarians would be so opposed. There was this mutiny by our parliament that said, no, we are not going to honor this judgment. And then they changed it into, yes, we are honoring it because we have fulfilled already everything.
Already during the hearings, the government had submitted to the court that it was perfectly legitimate for members of the public to call on states to do more to combat climate change, but suggested the European Court of Human Rights was not the right place to decide such national policies. That was a matter for the government, parliament, and people of Switzerland, it said. It also repeatedly dismissed what science has confirmed over and over again: the elderly women are more vulnerable to extreme heat. In June, the parliament voted to reject the ruling. It said it was not ignoring it, but rather that it did not need to react as it already had an effective climate change strategy.
There were these commuting newspapers that liked to make quick surveys, and they did one behind the other. They did two of them, and there it actually said that the majority of the people are not behind the judgment. I hated it. I hated that the commuting newspaper asked these questions. And of course, then even the questions are formulated in a certain way that already prompts a certain answer. But then that was, of course, a great argument by our government today. Well, the people are not even behind. We hoped that we had done our job and sort of congratulate us. Oh, haha, you did something that has an impact worldwide. So now you can really go to the rocking chair. But no, we still have to be up and around and make sure that this judgment does get implemented and just keep up the pressure.
The struggle for accountability continued well beyond the initial verdict. In March 2025, the Council of Europe's Committee of Ministers, the body tasked with overseeing the execution of the court's judgments, stated that Switzerland was still not doing enough to honor the ruling. While the Swiss government updated its CO2 Act and set climate goals through 2030, the committee urged states to provide concrete evidence of how its policies align with the ruling, through a formal carbon budget or otherwise. This would require Switzerland to determine its fair share of global emissions to remain within the 1.5 warming threshold established by the Paris Agreement. Although Switzerland previously argued that the court did not mandate specific budgets and that no internationally accepted method for such calculations exists, the committee maintained its pressure. By the end of 2025, a second review by the committee concluded that Switzerland had still not credibly implemented the central requirement of the ruling for a CO2 budget compatible with a 1.5-degree limit.
You know, we were present at the big debate in our National Council, in a parliament, and that was another incredible experience, just how those men from the right wing, how they talk and how they stand in front of the microphone with their belly out. And, oh, these women up there, look at them. Up on the gallery. Look at those women up there, how healthy they look. And they complain about it being too hot in the summer. Or another parliamentarian said, well, in other countries it gets hotter. So you can see how stupid the dismissals were. And when we went to Strasbourg, I said, if we are turned down, if you're also dismissed at this school, at least I want some intelligent arguments against us and not what we had heard up to now. I mean, can you imagine a court saying, you don't have the right to complain? I mean, in all instances in Switzerland, we were not heard, and the content of the complaint was not looked at. It was only decided whether we have the right to put in this complaint or not. And then these three different places gave different reasons for dismissing us. And one of them was really that, oh yes, we have climate change, but everybody is affected, not just you. And with everybody affected, they specifically mentioned also winter tourism. So you can imagine how that felt for us, being that segment of the population that dies the most during heat waves. And you are put on par with the impact on winter tourism, which of course there is. I mean, if you have a hotel somewhere up on, I don't know, maybe 1,200 meters and not higher, and you just don't get the snow that you want for skiing, then of course that might be existential for you.
Beyond ensuring implementation, the KlimaSeniorinnen have transitioned into a global symbol of climate justice. Beyond the courtroom, the members have been active in public advocacy to ensure their story inspires further action. Elisabeth even delivered a powerful TED Talk on the group's journey from local activists to international legal pioneers.
What we have been working on, good question. I just keep doing a lot of public work. Although there is opposition here in Switzerland, there are also many groups who want us to come as main speakers. So we are actually continuously on the road. Then in this time, we wrote a book, and this is now out since September. And then we did now a lot of readings, and there was this film that was made about us, Trop Chaud, in which we were very involved, and specifically every viewing there was of this Trop Chaud. And then there was always a panel discussion after that where we were present all over Switzerland. And just doing what we were doing before. We are invited also by schools, by school classes, and do presentations there. We have a very intense process about finding out where can we have the best impact. Is it with the government here, or is it possibly still in Strasbourg with the Council of Europe? So we are in the process still of finding out where can we put more pressure, I say, but have more impact. Because for us it's very important that the Committee of Ministers, which come out of the Council of Europe, that they don't close the case before it actually has been implemented. And one of the big issues for us is the CO2 budget, because hardly any country has one. Switzerland doesn't have. And so the climate measures they take are not in line with the 1.5 degree of global warming. So we are beyond that when we look at those measures, and they are not based on science. And that's what we actually really want to happen, that they have a climate policy based on a CO2 budget. That CO2 budget is based on science.
These elderly women's victory represents more than a local legal win. It serves as a blueprint for how civil society can leverage human rights frameworks to challenge state apathy toward the climate crisis. They, like many other activists around the world, have moved the climate conversation from the realm of policy debate into the halls of justice, redefining the role of the individual citizen in holding power accountable. Today, Elisabeth continues to share the group's journey and inspire people around the world to stand up for climate justice.
I use this term that has been used over and over and over and over, but it's still a good one. Find out where you can make a difference. Whatever that is, do it. Get up and do it. And certainly for the young ones, that keep the pressure on us old ones, that we don't leave the mess and the cleanup to you. Because for me, that is so unfair that just because we cannot come up with a decent climate policy, that you might have to clean up the mess in 20 years, the next 20 years, or maybe whatever. And also stay active, because you know probably yourself that It helps against helplessness. It makes you feel you can have an impact on something. And every little step is important, and do not do it alone. Try to join a group that is already active, because that's how we survived the 10 years, just by the glue between us. And that doesn't mean you have to love each other all the time. We sometimes fight, we have different opinions, but it's never mean, it's never separating. And then celebrate when you have a success, and don't wait for the big sort of success. Just think, oh, every little step that we achieve has the right to be celebrated. Then you can start worrying again the next day. Just also when you fail, you lick your wounds for a day or two, and then you just stand up and go on. And that is easier when you're in a group, because they were also licking their wounds, and then you can help them getting over that. Or they also felt like, oh, let's celebrate this, although we didn't achieve 100%, but maybe 80 or even just 60, but that's already something.
Thank you for listening, and see you next time.